Okay, I see recording has started already and it's 1 o'clock. I thought we'll give it another minute or two just to make sure that there's more people connected.
Okay, Junita.
Well, it's after 1 already, and seeing that the meeting is recorded, I think we can start so long. So let me introduce myself. My name is Junita Swart. I'm with UADS, the Universal Accessibility and Disability Services, and I'm stationed on the George campus as one of the student coordinators. I need to welcome a couple of people here. I see that there's been invites sent out to external stakeholders from the Mandela Metro, as well as the Business Chamber. I hope some of them is able to attend. Then from inside the uni community, we have representatives from the human resources, from Transformation Office, Graduation and Placement, Legal Services, Public Management and Leadership, and Communication and Marketing. And let's hope they'll all join in at some stage. And well presented here is members of our team. Unfortunately, not all of us are able to attend due to this terrible time of the year where a lot of us get sick. And apparently our presenter as well is feeling a bit under the weather, although she doesn't look it. We must treat her with a bit of compassion, seeing that she's not feeling too well. So is our head of department is unfortunately on compassionate leave, so she won't probably not be able to attend, but we have our, I suppose it's our acting head, Mr. Nkashi Ati. Just wave. There you are. Thank you so much for being here. And then, of course, I hope some students will attend as well. At the moment, I can't see any, but let's hope for the best. It's a busy time of year for them, coming back to campus, getting everything sorted and organized and so on. But luckily, as I say, we are recording the meeting, so we will be able to maybe distribute it amongst them. Before I carry on with introducing our speaker, I would just like to remind you that that we will appreciate it if you all mute your mics. But Nika has indicated that she will appreciate it if you raise your hand or leave comments in the chat box while she's presenting. Let's have it an ongoing conversation. And seeing that we're not too many people, I think that can be a great conversation just among the few of us. I just want to take my face off again while I read to you, because it's quite an impressive biographical of Nika Oberholtser. Nika obtained a B occupational therapy degree at the University of Stellenbosch and worked in adult neurosurgery and neurology in South Africa as well as in the UK. On returning to South Africa, She mainly focused on children with learning difficulties and developmental delays. During this time, she qualified as a sensory integration therapist. Nika co-authored a series of 5 books on topics including autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder. From 2014 to 2020, she worked for a skills institute where the focus was on adults with physical and mental impairments in the learnership arena. She is passionate about advocating inclusion for persons with disabilities in the workplace and has developed a guideline for employers and employees based on the relevant South African legislation for understanding the process of disability inclusion at work. She has also made available a document which I'll be able to share with you after the webinar. She is currently the Sales Director for eReports Africa, assisting life insurers and lawyers in an easy access to a list of medical specialists. In conclusion, let me just get us back online. Nika strongly believes that disability is only another form of diversity, and therefore it fits in very well. And she's the ideal speaker at this webinar because we have it's part of the activities of the August Diversity Month that we have at the Nelson Mandela University. And with that all said, Nika, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that, Janita. Appreciate that. Yes, so as she said, speaking up for the rights of persons with disabilities is my passion. I'm not at the moment in clinical practice because I believe that bringing eReports to South Africa is what I need to do to give every claimant in the country the same access to medical experts as someone would in a main city. So that is why I've stepped out of the clinical arena and into the business arena. So hopefully we can get a lot more people that we can help prevent disability. But without any further ado, please, stop me at any time. I'm going to share my screen and ask questions. And if you disagree with me, please go for it. I don't mind at all. I don't, sorry, I don't think I know everything. But anyway, so let's kick it off. So what we're going to discuss, sorry, my voice, by the way, as Janita said, I'm a bit under the weather, so let's hope my voice holds. So I'm going to talk about the background on disability and employment. I'll touch on the legislation, including the disability definition that's relevant in the workplace. I have a quick touch on reasonable accommodations, what needs to be done to create an inclusive workplace. And then for me, ultimately, confidentiality and disclosure is one of the most important factors. And especially now with the POPI Act in play, I think now even more than ever. So in my research over the years, and the reason I've unpacked all these laws isn't because I wanted to be a lawyer, excuse me, but I wanted to understand the landscape and which definition fits where and why there are so many different definitions of disability internationally and also nationally. So I started with looking at the stats of how many people in South Africa have disabilities. And I noticed that Stats SA did a study some years ago, and they said that 7.5% of the population, the South African population, have disabilities. And I thought, yo, that doesn't sound right. So in unpacking the research that they did, I realized that they'd excluded mental illness which is a diagnosis, but if it's severe enough, can become disabling. And they also excluded children under the age of 5 years. So did some further investigations, and Disabled People South Africa said the figure is actually 14% of the population, which means that 5.6 million South Africans live with a disability. However, I think about 1% of people with disabilities are employed. So yeah, that was for me one of the big issues when I started my work. Then where it all started with legislation, I always want to know the history behind things. So I'll just put it out there straight. I'm a complete nerd and I'm fine with that. I'm proud of it. So I looked at where all the legislation in South Africa came from, what it was based on, and it's actually based on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And that's about protecting the rights of the person with a disability in the workplace. So South Africa ratified that. So we accepted that we will accept everything they say about the rights of persons with disabilities and write it into the Bill of Rights, into our Constitution. And what is written in the Constitution is that we're not only going to allow employers to just put it in a policy and the box is ticked, but actually that they have to put it into practice. So, and that is where the Employment Equity Act comes in. So what the Employment Equity Act is about is achieving equity in the workplace. And I'll talk a bit more about equity and equality in a minute. But basically what they want to do is have equal opportunities and fair treatment of all the designated groups, and it includes persons with disabilities, etc. You can have a look at the Labour Relations Act, and if you should find that the Employment Equity Act is a hard read, you can either have a look at the Code of Good Practice on Disability in the Workplace, or what I found to be very easy to read and understand was the Technical Assistance Guidelines. It literally gives you examples, it gives you it in layman's terms, it gives you everything you need. So if you look at the notes that you'll be getting, you're going to think I'm very smart, but to be quite honest, I just based it on the tag. So there's nothing that I invented that was very clever. It's all there, but it takes time to read and understand it. So if we look at why it's the Employment Equity Act and not the Employment Equality Act, is because equality means giving everyone the same thing. And it only works if we start from the same place. So you can see the short guy is at a disadvantage because his box he got everything, it's fair, but he is still at a disadvantage. Whereas equity means fairness, and that means I give you what you need in order to be successful. And I think if we keep that in mind, when we want to include or create an inclusive workplace, then that will go a long way. So traditionally, and I think this is where a lot of the stigma and the fears and the hesitancy comes from to employ people with disabilities, is that the person is seen as a problem according to the medical model. Now, this is the old model, and this is a diagnostic model. So this is for doctors to use to diagnose certain impairments. And it sees the person as a problem, and you know, it stops the whole process in its tracks. So the Employment Equity Act, in direct contrast to that, has adopted the social model when they look at disability and work. And what they're saying is the problem is not the person, the problem is the world in which we live, where we don't create equal opportunities, or we don't offer fairness in all areas. So what could it be? It could be isolation and exclusion. So people can't attend certain schools, mainstream schools, for example, because they have a different way of learning. Then there's the negative attitudes and stigma, especially around mental illness. I've found that when I worked for the Skills Institute, if they found out that the person has a mental illness like bipolar mood disorder or schizophrenia or psychotic disorder, even though they're stable, they didn't want them at the work site. So that's where the attitudes and stigma comes from. And also within workplaces, I found that unless people are sensitized, educated, and explained to how to assist, what to expect, they've quickly marginalized a person with disability. We don't have to look for poor job prospects. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world as it is. So if you've been excluded from education because of your disability, your job prospects aren't that great either. And then, of course, inaccessible transport. I loved it when SPA did the Wheelchair Wednesdays and had able-bodied people in wheelchairs and going around trying to navigate, going to the shopping centre, going to a public loo, etc. I think every company should have a Wheelchair Wednesday every day, every week, and one employee should try it out. I'm not even going to say much about a small print format. We seem to think that font size 12 is easy for everyone to read. I can assure you, even at my age, I find 12 very difficult to read. And I don't have a visual impairment. I'm just getting old. And the no parking spaces, oh my gosh, I think this is the thing that gets me the most, is that able-bodied, physically abled people parking in disabled parking spots. And I'll tell you a little story about that. I'll come back into the room while I tell you this ridiculous story about myself, but just to demonstrate how strongly I feel about that. So as you can see, I have blonde hair, but it's actually grey. But I'm very averse to becoming grey, so I go for my highlights every 6 weeks. And I was sitting at the hair salon and I was watching the door, because right opposite the door was the disabled parking. And I don't know how many of you have seen people who get highlights, but they put foils in your hair and you actually look like you're about to go into the oven at any moment, and the other hair sticks out like this. So it's quite a sight. But anyway, so this strapping young man parked in the disabled parking bay, and I just saw red. So he ran into SPA or whatever, where he was going. I wrote a note, and as I was about to put it on his windscreen, he came out, and I think he got the fright of his life, because I was chasing after him with this note that said, "You seem perfectly able. Why did you park here? And please don't do it again." So yeah, that's just a little side note, but that's how strongly how strongly I feel about that. Okay. Let's go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so let's get to the definition of disability, and I'm going to watch the clock here. Right. Here's a fun fact. BBEE has their own definition. SASA has their own definition. SARS has their own definition. The World Health Organization has a definition, and then there's the Employment Equity Act. So I was trying to figure out, because when I started the unit at CIA, I was like, which one do I apply? Because it was up to me to verify that the person actually did meet the criteria to be classified as disabled, and I certainly wasn't going to let someone who doesn't qualify get the opportunity as opposed to someone who does. And eventually I figured out, okay, it's the Employment Equity Act. So what it says is, first of all, the impairment, now listen, I'm saying impairment, not disability. The impairment must be long-term or recurring. So what that means is the effect of the impairment has to have been there for 12 months or longer, or recurring meaning that, let's say, sorry about the dog, he hates motorbikes and checkers 60/60s outside. Recurring means that you have flare-ups, like, for example, with multiple sclerosis, or indeed bipolar mood disorder, where you have long periods where you're fine, and then you have periods when you are not doing so well. Physical or mental, that's obvious. Physical can be any loss of a body part or a sensory issue, such as loss of vision or sight. And a mental impairment includes intellectual impairment and any psychiatric diagnosis. So if you've ticked box 1 and 2, you're not in the clear yet. You have to conform to the third criteria, which says it has to substantially limit the person's prospect of entry into or advancement in employment. So that is a mouthful. So let's just see why this thing's not moving. There we go. So substantially limiting, what does it mean? It means that if you look at the core functions of the job, so what the job is really about, and not all the frilly bits on the side, that they need adjustments, or what we call reasonable accommodations. So they need you to be flexible as the employer in how they perform the task. And these adaptations that they're asking of you are called reasonable accommodations. So if the effects of the impairment, so it can be long-term or recurring, you can have the diagnosis of a mental impairment or a physical impairment, but if it's not substantially limiting, then you are not covered under the Act and you don't qualify as disabled. So what I'm saying is a diagnosis alone doesn't mean you have a disability. So I used to get really annoyed with clients when I worked at CIA if they got the salespeople to ask me if I could provide a list of disabilities. Because quite frankly, the list doesn't exist. It's as good as asking me, give me a list of people in South Africa who have a disability. I'm going to come back to that. I just want to go to this. So why isn't there a list? Because no two people are affected by an impairment in the same way. Disability is an interplay between the person, the environment in which they live, and the job that they're applying for, if we take the Employment Equity Act into consideration. So what I'm saying is I can, for example, have a lower limb amputation, and a person next to me can have a lower limb amputation at the same level. And we've both applied for the same job. But I can, for argument's sake, afford a prosthetic limb, I can afford physiotherapy, and etc., etc., etc. And the treatment that's been given to me and the availability of options for me in terms of how I manage my diagnosis makes it possible for me to do my job like anyone else would. So I need no adjustments in the workplace. Whereas person B could not have access to a medical aid, they can't afford a prosthetic limb, they're in an old wheelchair, or they use old crutches, they can't afford physios, they can't afford whatever medical treatment they need for them to manage this. So what I'm saying to you is forget the label, get to know the person and ask them what their needs are. I'm just going to flick back quickly to reasonable accommodations. People employers, not people. Employers always think it's got to be high tech, it's got to be expensive. So let's rather not go down that road and try and employ a person with a disability. However, it's very rare that it's going to cost the employer anything. What it's going to cost you is a bit of common sense and a little bit of compassion, and the willingness to do things differently, not to be stuck in your ways. So, for example, if the person's substantially limiting factor is that they're dependent on medication, like, for example, with bipolar mood disorder specifically, it's extremely important that people take their medication as prescribed, because they're at risk of a relapse if they don't take their medication. So if they have to go to the clinic once a month, and we all know how long it takes to get your medication at the clinic, then allow them some time off. Give them extra 12 days a year, what that you call medical leave or whatever you want to call it, and that will make it possible for them to function. If we look at a physical impairment with poor physical endurance, think about what is a safe time for the person, for example, to stand? How many breaks do they require? Should I rather let them work in a seated position? So it's just a bit of, trying to fit the puzzle together. A person in chronic pain, again, think of breaks. What are you going to do when the person's pain increases? Which tasks can you take out of their day that increases their pain? And then if we look at the cognitive impairments, simple things like giving one instruction at a time, repeating an instruction if they didn't get it the first time, tell them, ask me anytime if you get stuck. So that's what I'm saying. It's just a little bit of common sense, and you don't need an occupational therapist to tell you how to do this. But if it's a difficult case, you can always rely on the OTs to help you. So as I said, you've got to take into consideration the person and the effect of the impairment on them. Then the environment that they work in and live in. If you know that they've got to take a taxi and they suffer from night blindness, then you're not going to make them work shifts where they have to travel in the dark, for example. And then the core functions of the job. So the core functions of the job, and this is really important when you start profiling to advertise for a job, they are those things that make up the basics of the job. So if someone is, for example, an admin assistant, and you've got a CEO who likes someone to bring his tea to them and decides this is the person who's going to bring it, that's not the core functions of a job. You need to know beforehand what that job is. They've got to go and unpack it and say, these are the things this person will need to do, and these are the skills they'll need, and this is the education they'll need. And then when you interview your candidates from there on, you can ask them, how will you perform the core functions of the job, and would you require accommodations? Yeah. So as I said, no list of disabilities. What I can give you is categories. But remember that it will affect each individual differently. So there we have it. If you have any questions about these, feel free to ask me. If you look on page 14 and 15 of the Disability Toolkit of the Human Rights Commission, you'll find the list there. And you can also look again at the Employment Equity Act, the code and the tag. Okay, so for me, I wanted to know what's excluded. When is it not a disability? Because I didn't want a person without a disability to take the spot of someone with a disability. So the Act excludes two categories specifically. And the one is, if you give me a second, I just want to get to that page. The one is any impairment that can be controlled, corrected, or lessened to the point that they have no limiting effects. If we still lived in the year of the dinosaur, I probably would have been visually impaired because I really have bad eyesight. But with my glasses, I can see perfectly. So if you can correct the impairment with any device to the point that the person does not require reasonable accommodations and is not substantially limited, the person is excluded. Then self-imposed body adornment. So you want to say, what is that? Tattoos and piercings. That is not a disability. I don't know what it is. I think it's attention-seeking behavior. I don't know. So not that I mind any of these, but yeah, they are excluded under the Act. And there are a lot of employers who say if you have a visible tattoo or whatever, then, you know, we can't employ you. Then sexually deviant behavior, that's against public policy, as well as compulsive gambling, the tendency to steal or light fires, normal deviations in height, weight, or strength. So I don't have very strong hands, but I'm still within normal limits, so I'm not disabled. And then conventional physical and mental characteristics and common personality traits, like, don't want to say the word, but I don't know if you've heard of the book or the YouTube clip, Snakes in Suits. And it's about people who abuse their position of power. So that's not a disability, that's just rude. What is also excluded is a person who uses illegal substance, abuses substances, substance use disorder, like, I don't know, narcotic, mandrakes, alcohol, unless, and there's an unless with this one. The person is currently participating in a recognized treatment program. So I, of course, had the auditors on my case a lot about allowing persons with substance use disorder onto learnerships. And they would say, yes, but they've gone through rehab, they're fine now. And my answer to that was, really, are they fine? Because for me, not only are they going to have possibly a psychotic disorder because of it, but also cognitive impairment. And on top of that, this person now, for me, their rehab starts when they leave the rehab facility, because now they've got to start like a baby, start crawling before they can walk again, reintegrating into life. Work for me is therapy for them, because they're getting the structure, they're getting used to not spending their whole day either using or looking for money or trying to find the substances. So for me, there's the long-term effect of that is, for me, what would classify the person as disabled. So what you need to do if someone sends in an application is, first of all, check if it's an impairment, physical or mental. Then you've got to check if it's long-term or recurring. And as I said, the crux lies with substantially limiting. So those are the questions you can ask. If you say yes to the first criteria, physical and mental, and yes to long-term or recurring, but no to substantially limiting, then the person does not qualify. So we've spoken a bit about reasonable accommodation, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But just to give you some ideas of other things you can do is, if someone is a wheelchair user, just make sure you don't have cables on the floor, or that the workstations are organized in such a way that the person struggles to access their desk. If you're going to be doing interviews and you know the person is in a wheelchair, just make sure that they don't have to do stairs because some companies actually don't have, they lock the lift and then this person can't get into the interview room. So that's actually discrimination. Then changing training and assessment materials and systems, and I'm sure the disability unit does this very well. In the workplace, if it's a non-essential function, if it's not part of the core function of the job, get someone else to do it. Adjusting work time and leave, I've spoken about that. And then you would be surprised how far a buddy in the workplace can go for a person with a disability. Just someone they can trust, someone who gets them, someone who they can talk to. And if they get stuck on something, that they can just say, hey, I'm struggling with this, can you help me? So basically, I want to say to employers, just go for it. Stop being so scared and start learning, you know. Jeff McDonald is a mental health, activist. And I would encourage you to go and watch his video on YouTube. I had the privilege to meet him, Jeff with a Geoff, McDonald. And he said something that stuck in my mind. He says, at least be curious, at least try and find out about it, you know, that makes you a decent human being. So what is important for me to also tell you today is that reasonable accommodation does not just start when the person is employed and it's a static thing. You've got to do it right through from the minute you decide there's a position available, recruitment, advertising, interviewing. So through the employment cycle, all the way through to termination of employment, should it come to that eventually. So what does it take? For me, it starts at the top. Commitment from the leaders. There's got to be the managers buy-in. You've got to get the CEOs on your side, and there has to be disability champions in every workplace. And disability champions, their role for me is to create awareness, to make sure that there's no discrimination, that the employment equity goals are met, etc., etc. The Employment Equity Act Section 19 gives you an analysis to do a workplace audit, so start there. And then I always feel sorry for HR staff because they've got so much on their plate, but they are part of the implementation team. And for me, number 4 is also a very important point here, is to focus on the policies. Ask a company, and someone in the unit, their disability unit there at NMU, I think this is a lovely resource, research topic. Go and ask 100 companies if they have a disability policy. They will have a health and safety policy. They will have a policy that covers incapacity, but do they have a disability policy? Because that's the game changer. And that deals with what if someone goes off work for a period of time and has to come back, for example, if they have to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital or whatever, and they have to come back. What's your policy and your processes in getting that person back to work? So I'm pretty sure most of them won't have a disability policy. And I say that with a lot of confidence because of my time in the corporate world. So anyway, build capacity through training and awareness. It mustn't be disability month once a year. It must be disability month every day of the year. Because the more people are equipped with knowledge, the less scary something becomes, and the better equipped they are to assist in creating an equal world. And then, of course, if you're going to implement something, you've got to measure your results and communicate your outcomes. Then if you want to do an audit at your workplace, I don't know why this table numbered everything as 1, it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, etc. But you can start by just doing a little audit, and it's in the notes that I'm sending you, to see where you are in terms of compliance to having an inclusive workplace. So it's all there for you. I'm not going to read through everything, but what I would say is educate your staff and consult with the employees with disabilities. Their slogan at the DPSA is nothing about us without us, and I believe they are the best people to consult, not professionals. So as I said, right through the employment process, and there it is. And what I want to just highlight here, and then I'm just about done, you survived your Friday afternoon, is that with conditional job offers, don't make a conditional job offer to an applicant if the reasonable accommodations that you are able to offer can't remove the risk to the applicant or to other people in terms of health and safety. You can withdraw a job offer under 3 conditions. The one is unjustifiable hardship, and that's the loophole that employers use. That means that the operations of the company will be harmed in such a way that they can't continue to operate. And that's a lovely little excuse that they use, because they say, oh no, it's going to cost an elevator and this and that's nonsense. It's not financial, the hardship, but it actually will harm the operations of the business. So don't let them get away with that one. The other reason you can withdraw a job offer is if the person cannot perform their core duties, even with reasonable accommodation. And lastly, for health and safety concerns, if you can objectively show that it's a health and safety risk, then you can withdraw. In terms of orientation and training, important here is not just for the person who joins your company, but it must include sensitization of the other employees. Otherwise, it will flop, because they're going to perceive reasonable accommodation as special treatment, because people are that small-minded. And then retaining people with disabilities. This is if someone was a staff member and, for example, had a car accident and now has a disability. Please go and have a look at the tag how to deal with that matter. But basically what you need to do is, can the person still perform the core functions of their previous job, yes or no? Are there functions that you should reassign? Can you implement accommodations? If no to all of those, then you have to look for alternative positions in the company, and only if no, then can you go the incapacity route. The last thing that I'm always on my soapbox about is confidentiality and consent, and I got into many, many heated arguments over the years with companies that wanted a list of people with disabilities with their ID numbers and their contact details, and I was horrified every time. You can only do that with a written consent of the person. Records regarding the diagnosis and impairment must be kept where it can't be accessed. It mustn't be left on a desk open, for example. And if information is no longer required, you must destroy it. You can reveal the person's disability if required for health and safety reasons, but only after consulting with the employee. And you only advise the relevant staff on reasonable accommodation needs. So don't label the person. Okay, so there's a lot to take in. I can talk for days on this and on things, but I think I'm going to stop my presentation here and have a chat to all of you and see if there are any questions or comments. Now's the time you have me. Yes, someone's hand's up. Larry, Dr. Larry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Larry!
Yes, thank you for the wonderful, wonderful presentation. It was just amazing. You covered a lot of material and certainly opened my eyes to a world that I'm unfamiliar with. I would like for you to just expand a little bit when you touched on conditional job offers and give us a little bit more insight about what that entails.
Larry, trust you to ask a difficult question. So conditional job offer is if the claimant, sorry, my world that I work in now is claimant. If the applicant has the qualifications and the skills and meets the requirements in terms of the core functions of the job, and you want to make the offer, but the condition is that the person has to go for testing so that we can see if he or she will require any reasonable accommodation, or as they say, I think in America they call it adjustments, reasonable adjustments. So if it comes back from the assessment that it's going to, seriously disrupt the way the company operates to the point that they will no longer be able to operate well, or if, with the best intentions in the world and all the reasonable accommodations that's available, the person still won't be able to do the core functions of the job, then you can withdraw the offer. And also, if after this assessment the person, it will be a health and safety risk to them and to other people, then you'd rather not employ them in that position.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes, I see other hands. Anyone who's got a hand up?
It's Nandi. My hand was up first, actually.
And yeah, I can't see who goes up first. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I think for me, I would like to really appreciate the presentation. It was succinct, but it was comprehensive at the same time.
Thank you.
So I appreciate it. I have no particular question except to ask that perhaps it's a question that I'm supposed to be asking from the colleagues that have organized the webinar. My work is in human resources. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Two, we've got a serious challenge in the workplace around inclusivity and around disclosures, and campaigns that have not yielded substantive disclosures, if I may say so. And I've also been saying that perhaps people are not disclosing because they want to know what is in it for them. I disclose and then what? But I think for me, it's also like around. I like the way you've defined a disability. It's quite. I would say, clarifies the matter. So it's just an appreciation of the presentation. I think where I'm getting into is one, how do we source you in terms of, we've got an employment equity forum at the university, and we are beginning to grapple with issues around persons with disabilities.
Right.
We've got a small reference group that is composed of persons that have disclosed themselves and they've raised their hands to help us to move on this in this area. So I would like to find out how can we pull you as a resource. That's number one, and perhaps make a presentation in our next Employment Equity Forum meeting. Then the other question is that do you do sensitivity training as well? And then I think then the other things, maybe we can take them off aside on the side.
Yes. Thank you for that. Yes, we can talk about doing another presentation to the Employment Equity Committee. And then in terms of disclosure, look, the person always reserves the right to disclose or not disclose, so you can't force them. So what is in it for them? Yeah. So once they disclose, then the employer has to accommodate them. Then the onus is on the employer to do everything in their power to accommodate them in the workplace. So, but you can't force people. And remember, they can disclose at any point in the employment cycle, so they don't have to do it at the start. It's up to them. obviously, if it's a physical disability, it's clear you can't miss it, then you're already immediately, as the employer, obligated to accommodate the person. It's more difficult with mental illness, and the big problem around disclosure and mental illness is stigma. People think they're going to be treated differently, they're going to be discriminated against, so they really do suffer in silence. So, yeah. Anyway, but Nandi, we can definitely talk after this or at another time. Okay.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who's next? I don't know whose hand was up first, second, or third. So whoever's hand's still up, just go. Renal?
Renal Rosa, hi. Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask, from a reasonable accommodation perspective,
Right.
let's say a staff member, a differently able staff member, specifically with cerebral palsy, has to attend an out-of-town event. And as the employer, you would cover the expense of the carer. Would it be seen as discrimination if you don't want to cover the expense of a service dog?
That's a good question. Is it, so you've got to go back to, is it part of the core functions of the job to have to attend this? Because you only have to accommodate activities that are part of the core function of the job. So does the person, why are they attending this out-of-town conference? Is it part of the job? Is it the critical part of the job? And if yes, then I would say you should accommodate them. If it's just something nice, then yeah, it's a difficult one. I think it's going to depend on how far each employer is willing to go. Yeah, but only if it's part of the core function of the job.
I think you've answered my question because it's actually developmental.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thanks. Anyone else? No? Oh, Atin Kosi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. Very comprehensive and very informative. My question is around the definition and its implications in the real life situation. I just want to make an example of a person who might have a short leg discrepancy and might need to use some adjustment on his shoes, or a foot orthosis discrepancy to sort of accommodate their disability. And I'm specifically referring to the point where you say disability is not only a diagnosis. The person must have enough substantial limits to their or functions of the job. So what if this person is a receptionist, and even though they clearly have a disability that is physical, that is visible, but in terms of them performing their duties, which are core function, there are no limits. You know, for instance, when you're a receptionist, you work with a phone, your core functions will be that, redirect communication. And my question is that, would you say that person is not covered and under the Act since they are not limited? Or do we have perhaps have a foresight on how they can be impacted on the job?
So again, I can't comment on individual cases, but with length discrepancies, often the person will have other issues like back pain, so they have chronic pain. You know, you've got to take into consideration the distance they have to, how do they get to work, you know, how do they move, can they do the filing, you know, how does it impact them? As I said, you've got to take all those things into consideration. So I can't comment on individual cases, but also think, you know, to get to the toilet, how long does it take them? Does it take them longer to get to the cafeteria, for example? That, you know, by the time they get there, lunch is almost over, whatever. So you've got to look at the environment, etc., etc., etc. So it's difficult to comment, yeah. But yeah, it's a very good question, because if a rugby player loses their little finger, they're definitely not disabled. But if a concert pianist would lose their finger, then they are disabled. So again, taking everything into consideration. Hope that answers your question to some extent.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. Have I missed anyone? Who is this person? Sorry, I can't. I think also you've asked everyone. Have I answered everyone? Okay. Janita, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you, Nika. I was just wondering, I see Otis and Dr. Larry's hands are still up. I don't know whether it's old hands or whether they just forgot to take it down. I got a request from someone asking, would it be possible for us to, or for anyone, to get hold of you or to contact you after this webinar? Are you available?
Yes, they can contact me. Just be, I don't see patients anymore. I don't practice clinically anymore, but I'll try my best if they have a question for me to answer them. Okay, will your contact details be, I can't remember your contact details. You've got it. It's nikatherapist@gmail.com. Yes, but it wasn't on the poster. And is it on the docs? Or should it's on the document. You can just send it out to them, Janita. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. And then I have one question. What about people suffering from epilepsy? Where do they fall in the categories? Epilepsy, you've got to again look at how does the impairment, how does this diagnosis, this physical, because it's a physical or neurological impairment, how does it impact them? If they are, say, they've been on medication for 10 years or however long, they've never since had a seizure, then I would not classify them as having a disability. But if despite the medication and, you know, treating the anxiety around it, they still have seizures once or twice a month, or once every 6 months, and then they're out of it for the rest of the day because they will be confused and have headaches and may need to sleep it off. Yeah, so again, it depends on how the impairment affects the person and their job. So if I have epilepsy and I apply for a job as a machine operator, that is not a good idea, because if you have a seizure, then you can, you know, be at risk for harming yourselves and others. So again, you've got to take everything into consideration. Yeah. So remember, epilepsy is a diagnosis, but we've got to look at all the other factors. Yes, thank you, Nika. And then anybody else? I see it's almost 2 o'clock. So just before we wrap up, is there anybody else who would like to ask Nika a question or maybe make a comment? If not, can I ask you, Artie, to maybe just have the last word and wrap up our webinar for us? And again, thank you, Nika, so much for coming. And even though you were not feeling well, I hope you have a good and a restful weekend. Thank you, Janita.
Okay, thank you, Janita. And special thanks to you, Nika, and as well as everybody else who have attended this webinar. I'm sure you would agree with me that these are the type of conversations and engagements we need to have from various people, various disciplines, various experts, you know, in order for us to move in the right direction, you know, because we don't know it all, as you said in the beginning. So from time to time, you need to hear about something you're not thinking about, someone to spark your thoughts, you know, in the right direction. So we appreciate you quite a lot, and definitely we wish to have you again on various topics and debates around this issue, because we need to have it time and time again in order for us to get it right. We love your passion and your love for this space. So thank you very much.
It's my absolute pleasure.
Find time to accommodate Nelson Mandela University, because we need to keep you closer.
I'll reasonably accommodate you.
We appreciate it. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, I think we've done it on time, and it was fruitful. Definitely, we will not forget it. And I love the fact that we have a recording, because we need to go back to this and listen again to your presentation.
Sure.
And thank you very much. And thank
You're welcome. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Bye now.
Right. Bye.
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 Thank you, Nika. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.